sometimes it's illogical, I admit. But there's a flow in it, and we might not have certain remarks in the second session that we do have in the first session, and vice versa. So yeah, you could join us for both sessions if you just want a bit of a high over, level 280, 285 on Azure AD Connect. Then the first session is you're good to go. If you want to dive deeper into immutable IDs, source anchors, conflict resolutions, that kind of stuff, that's session 2. And we'll be demoing quite a lot on Azure AD Connect.
Yep.
And ADMT, actually.
And ADMT.
Yep. So that's fun. If you don't know me, could be that you don't know me. Let me see, where am I? Right here. As Sean would say, I need no introduction. So, yeah, let's skip to Roelf then.
Yay. So I'm with Microsoft. I'm actually a cloud solution architect, so I don't deal a lot with identity management, but it's more of my hobby. I live in Dubai, so apparently I had the longest flight over here. And I said, we'll co-present, and in the second part, which is mainly mine part, and then Sander is supporting, and in the first part he's presenting and I'm supporting. Second part is mostly like deep dive into the technical bits and a lot of demos. And the first one is sort of an overview of what is Azure AD Connect, how did it become Azure AD Connect, etc., etc., etc.
Yep. And why you don't want to use FIM anymore.
Yep.
Did I just say that?
Yep.
I have a habit of delivering my punchlines in front of the session, but that's okay. All right. So what's the Dutch connection between me and Roelf? Well, we were both born in the Netherlands.
Yep.
We refer to this place as New Amsterdam still. You might call it New York, but that's fine. We are the original Yankees. So a lot of the words that you see around you here in New York are actually Dutch-based, which is fun for us. So yeah, we went out and I really got to know you this time. The fun part, what I really want to stress out, is that, and this is, I think Microsoft is really doing that on purpose. So Roelf is a cloud solution architect. You would expect a cloud solutions architect, wouldn't you? No, it's just one cloud, or just one solution. And it's Azure AD Connect today, right?
Only Azure.
All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the history of Azure AD, what problems it solved, the stuff that we had before we had Azure AD Connect, and how that all sucked really hard. And then, of course, we're going to talk about what Azure AD Connect does, what it doesn't do, and how you can use it. So I have about, I guess I lost count. I think I have 4, but I may have 5 slides with recommendations on how to do stuff with Azure AD Connect. So that's the fun part. That's a bit at the end of this session. So let's just dive into it shortly. So in the beginning, there was 32-bit DirSync. Thank you. That was fun. We also had a 32-bit, I guess it was called ILM at the time. Yep. So that kind of frames it where you can see that in time. And the support for 32-bit DirSync ended on January 1st, 2013. We have audio. Perfect.
One channel.
Oh, one channel. All right. Perfect.
Now it's 2.
Now it's 2.
Stereo.
A full stereo. Oh, wow. All right. And that was the first time that Microsoft actually pushed to get people off from a first version to a second version. And they had a lot of trouble doing that. And as a result, we now have some functionality in Azure AD Connect that solves that very problem for us. There's still there's 3 little hiccups that we have to go through yet. But then we're good to go for a longer period of time with Azure AD Connect again. Well, then we had Azure AD Sync and Azure AD Connect with Sync services. So Azure AD Sync is like a version 1.0 of Azure AD Connect. Then there were version 1.0 versions of Azure AD Connect itself with Sync services. And then we got Azure AD Connect version 1.1 as a branch, and that's the version where we are in today. And it's been fun because what you see is that, let me just stress that out. The Azure AD Connect version 1.0 and DirSync will no longer be functional after December 31st of this year. So if you still run DirSync, if you still run Azure AD Sync, if you still run a version 1.0 of Azure AD Connect, you're busted. So it's time to move. Doing nothing is not an option anymore. And then there's the Windows Azure AD Connector for Forefront Identity Manager that I have the most excellent rumor on, but I will not share. And of course, Microsoft Identity Manager. So what did they solve with Azure AD Connect? Why did they come up with Azure AD Connect and what problems did they have to solve? So there were a couple of solutions that were based on different architectures, different ideas, and stuff like that. Azure AD Connect 1.1 is a .NET 4 installation. So that means that it can be run on Windows Server 2008 up until, well, you could use Windows Server 1709, except that it's a server core installation. So you can't install Azure AD Connect on server core. So it's Windows Server 2008 up to Windows Server 2016 that you can run it on. There's an actual recommendation coming later on that says, you know what, use Windows Server 2012 or 2 or up. And there's good reasons for that. And what they did with Azure AD Connect is they said, you know what, we don't want to force customers to use DirSync and Azure AD Connect and then use another tool for ADFS, use another tool for that, be struggling with monitoring, be struggling with auditing, all that stuff. We're getting that together. So what they did is they created a framework with Azure AD Connect. They added ADFS implementation at first. They added ADFS management later on, so you can actually manage your ADFS from within Azure AD Connect. And of course, Azure AD Connect Health is installed by default. Reporting by default, if the ports are open, but you have to have an Azure AD Premium, just a Premium, right? You don't need a Premium license. Just a Premium P1 license to actually get to the reports that Azure AD Connect Health does. The reports, you do get the notifications.
Yep.
So that's perfect. And they did that, and they added it up into one solution. And what they also did, and they've been programming in that direction for the last couple of years towards having an easy tool to switch your authentication mechanism over. So ADFS and password hash sync. Password hash sync is actually the one that Microsoft has been pushing with Azure AD Connect. And we now have password authentication and seamless single sign-on as well, which is a bit odd to see it in a list of 4 because I guess you found out this week, right? You can have seamless single sign-on on all 3 of the other scenarios. So that's fun. So there's 3 big authentication scenarios and 1 feature.
So it's basically what they did is that the original DirSync and the Azure AD Sync were sort of like for the IT pros, and we had a lot of like mid-sized businesses that says, I have no clue what I'm doing, and I wanted to basically see, or have an easy GUI way of installing it and choosing my authentication method, etc., etc. So if you take the latest version of Azure AD Connect and you try to install it, you can actually say, I want express settings. It does everything for you. Right? It installs it, it sets up the password sync, it does everything for you, and you run it and you're done. But then also, if other customers said, but we want to have custom availability as well. So if you do the custom settings, it allows you to adjust everything that you just said and even more. And we'll talk more about that in this session and the next session as well.
Yep. So password hash sync, and this was quite an interesting battle that was going on inside of the identity division in Microsoft. Password hash sync was actually the answer from Microsoft to all the organizations that said, that's funny, if I want to go to the Microsoft cloud, I have to first add at least 5 servers on-prem. That doesn't make sense. So with password hash sync, you can actually have one system, one sync. It did run every 3 hours back then. Yep. Now it runs every 30 minutes, and they're gonna do some funky stuff with that. But that was it. I do have express settings and custom settings coming up, but let's first dive a bit into why we feel Azure AD Connect is the way to go and not, I'm sorry, Henrik, FIM or MIM. Any other MIM and FIM aficionados in the room? I'm not offending anyone with my opinion on FIM except Henrik? All right, perfect. So FIM and MIM are a terrifically wonderful solution to a specific problem. Azure AD Connect is a wonderful tool itself too, but to a very small specific problem. So yeah, you can solve a lot of identity synchronization problems with MIM and FIM. You can actually have HP, Oracle, SAP, all that stuff connected to whatever you want, on-prem and towards the cloud with the Windows Azure AD connector. FIM and MIM are not free, unfortunately, but they did clean up the licensing a bit, so it's now part of the EM plus S license, the Enterprise Mobility and Security license. And I was told by Microsoft that I should drop the plus. They never actually changed that one. Yep. And Azure AD Connect is free. Well, of course, you have to license the Windows Server that it runs on. It can only run on Windows Server. That's the part they didn't have running on Linux yet, I guess. I haven't talked to them about that. That would be, Anyway, so third-party backend, 30 backend systems. Yep. And Azure AD Connect only supports synchronizing ADDS or LDAP to Azure AD, and actually to one Azure AD tenant. Azure AD Connect has all those nifty little authentication scenarios, write-back scenarios, all that stuff. It actually has min sync, so you can only synchronize from a wizard the minimum amount of attributes that you really want synchronized for your scenarios. And the real big difference is that the connector for FIM and MIM is no longer maintained. So yes, Azure AD Connect sees new versions about 1 or twice a month. And the Windows Azure AD connector for FIM, well, let me make a really strong point. So about 19, 20 months ago, Microsoft renamed Windows Azure to Azure. The connector is still named Windows Azure. So that's about the time that they didn't make any significant changes to the connector. Just to give you a little bit of background on how old that connector actually is. And the deprecation has been announced, so that yes, Microsoft is first going to deprecate Azure AD Sync and DirSync, and following the fallout of that, and following the lessons learned on that, they'll proceed with phasing out the Windows Azure AD connector. So Azure AD Connect will soon be the only supported tool from Microsoft. There are other supported tools for object and attribute synchronization. It looked like you had a question.
No.
No? Perfect. So I made a little chart on that. So Azure AD Connect can synchronize multiple Exchange organizations well with the Windows Azure AD connector. That's really hard to do. Microsoft actually said that's not something that we would want you to do with the Windows Azure AD connector. So yes, they can both do synchronize ADDS and LDAP, but only FIM and MIM can do both simultaneously. There's an undocumented feature, or there's an undocumented way. Or was there a blog post last week something? There was a blog post last week that actually tells you how you can install, how after you install Azure AD Connect, you can configure it to talk to LDAP instead of ADDS environment. But it's largely undocumented. There's no official source on that. But you can have LDAP directories and sync them up to Azure AD if you wanted to. Now, of course, there's SQL, Oracle, SAP, PeopleSoft, you know the guys. Multiple Azure AD tenants, that's something that Azure AD Connect does not do, will not ever do. So if you're in a hosting environment, for instance, you have a lot of customers, they want a lot of Azure AD tenants, well, good for you. That's going to be something that you will have to solve either with a different solution coming somewhere in spring, not from Microsoft, or with multiple Azure AD Connect installations per customer, or actually per Azure AD tenant. Azure AD Connect will not synchronize single label domains. But actually, are there still people running those?
Yes.
Yes? Good to hear.
Ouch.
Yep. And of course, as I said, the write back for devices, groups, passwords. There's a 1.1.105.0 version of Azure AD Connect that actually does user write back, but they removed that very quickly again because there were some problems with it. And there's additional authentication scenarios as pass-through authentication and that stuff.
Remarking the question. So regarding the single level that you mentioned,
Yep.
I'm actually very familiar with that. I think in the last at least 6 years, every time Microsoft released a new version of something,
Yep.
they said that it will not support the single level. The only problem is that the guys that have the single level are huge,
Yep.
and for them to change basically means ADMT and all the fun stuff. So I'm pretty sure that at some point the no will become yes. Regarding the synchronized multiple exchange organizations, in a scenario where you have multiple forests,
Yep.
is that the same concept?
That is the same concept, yeah. So if you have multiple exchange organizations in, for instance, resource forest, then you can do that with Azure AD Connect because it supports multiple domains, multiple forests, but those are yes, yes on both. I have a longer table than this, but everything that was the same, I just got out of it, except one.
So basically, you'd have to register the namespace, the multiple exchange namespaces within that tenancy.
Yep.
Okay.
This might be dumb, but which one is the current one that's going to be continued? I don't understand the two differences.
All right. So Azure AD Connect is the one that will be continued.
Okay.
And Windows Azure AD Connector for Vim and MIM is the one that they're going to announce deprecated pretty soon. Yep. All right, so what does Azure AD Connect offer? Because I think we have a clear path now that Azure AD Connect is going to be the only supported way from Microsoft to do this stuff. I have a problem. No, I don't have a problem. So it synchronizes to Azure AD, and Azure AD, and luckily, this is a slide that I use for any other convention, any other user group, but I don't have to tell you what Azure AD is, right? That was quick. Cool. I don't have to tell you about the many benefits of Azure AD. Or do I? Well, it's funny because if you're talking about some of those scenarios in a hybrid identity scenario, or in a hybrid identity environment, that's only possible with Azure AD Connect. So self-service password reset with a write back to on-prem is only supported by Microsoft using Azure AD Connect. But most of the times, it's premium features anyway for Azure AD. So if you have a large organization like a university or a government agency, what you'll see is that they'll have large amounts of Azure AD Free or Azure AD Basic licenses for any other normal user account. So you won't have self-service password reset in a hybrid scenario. You won't have the multi-factor authentication, for instance. Now, there's a lot of authentication scenarios for Azure AD. I made a small list. But again, seamless single sign-on is a feature to the above three. Cloud-only accounts is the accounts that you just type in. They end with onmicrosoft.com, UPN suffixes, like that. And you can also, or always have, third-party authentication. You can have third-party object and attribute synchronization. You can have third-party authentication add-ons, like the one from Ping that Microsoft now has a collaboration with. So what does that look like under the cover? And this is fun because I know John Saville did the same thing yesterday. And you can take a picture now, but what I can also do is, because these slides are heavily animated, I can give you a sign when I'm done animating, and then you can take a picture. Because what you'll see is that I have all that kind of stuff. So I'll tell you. So if you have an Active Directory, and you want to do something with Azure Active Directory, then Azure AD Connect is going to be your go-to solution for that. If you have multiple organizations, multiple Azure AD tenants, think multiple Azure AD Connect installations. So if a colleague goes to an Azure Active Directory integrated application, and I'm just going to assume that it's a federated app in this case. So you'll have to redirect the HTTP 301 towards Azure AD, because that is exactly what Azure AD integrated means. So you have a redirect to Azure Active Directory, and of course Azure Active Directory is going to redirect you back to ADFS, because there's a relying party trust there as well. This is basic WS-fed stuff. So you would always authenticate to the ADFS server that uses Kerberos constraint delegation to get you the stuff. And then you go through the claims issuance rules and the claims transformation rules to get to the claim types in your claim token. And the claim token is something that you can actually send over untrusted networks, because it is digitally signed, it's optionally encrypted if you wanted to, but that will still mean you would have a lot of overhead on both sides. And most of the times, the side of the customer side, the organization side, will be the first one to get into resource problems. So you get a claim, and that claim is then sent to Microsoft. Microsoft can have conditional access rules defined by you towards the claim tokens that you send it. You get a new claim token that's signed by Azure Active Directory, because that claim token is the only one that is accepted by the Azure Active Directory integrated application. Because the application does not have a relying party trust with you, only with Azure AD. You don't have a relying party trust with the application, just with Azure AD. For any application running in Azure Active Directory, it does not matter what the authentication scenario is that you use between your Active Directory and your Azure Active Directory. So let's look at password hashing. And password hashing is, if you ask me, the most dumb thing that Microsoft marketing has done to any feature in a Microsoft product ever. I think the better name is synchronization of the hash. So we have, and I'm still pretty lucky about that, still pretty content, we have hashes that are stored in Active Directory. Those are the NT hashes. It's MD4 style, I know. It's not that hip anymore, but it was 20 years ago when they designed it. And of course, we had to, Microsoft had to figure in the computational constraints of that time. So there's an NT4 hash or NT hash, and that hash is stored in Active Directory. Now Microsoft has really thought that through and thought, you know what? Probably the worst thing we can do is to copy that hash to Azure Active Directory, because there's now, I think, 10 million organizations in Azure Active Directory, something like that, 10, 12. And what if Azure Active Directory would leak those hashes? Then every on-prem organization that uses password hashing would be susceptible to pass the hash attacks, for instance. So what they did is they think, well, you know, we have to do something different with that. So they take the NT hash and they create an org ID hash. And the way they do that is they take the NT4 hash and they shove it through AES 256 1,000 times. That should do it, right? And that new org ID hash is the one that is actually synchronized to Azure Active Directory. Of course, the way the NT hash goes to org ID hash is documented. You could figure out how to do it yourself, but the best way to do it is with Azure AD Connect. So you have to have Azure AD Connect, and Azure AD Connect has to be configured to do password hashing. So it will take the NT4 hashes, hash it again, and synchronize that latter hash to Azure AD. Now, of course, and this is fun, if you have self-service password reset in this scenario, what you'll see is that you can actually have the self-service password reset functionality in Azure AD, and it will actually talk to your Active Directory when you reset it and ask Active Directory, could you reset it, please, for me? And then if that's successful, we could then synchronize it back. So that's how self-service password reset works in that feature, and that's why we all have the password history rules, the password complexity rules on-prem in the cloud. So that's perfect for self-service password reset. Now, of course, if the colleague goes to the integrated application, we see the same redirect stuff. But now, the colleague has to enter their password with Azure AD. And Azure AD has the org ID hash, so it takes the password, creates an NT hash, creates an org ID hash, and then just compares the two org ID hashes. Are they the same? Yeah, okay, so basically the password was the same. You're logged on. You can do conditional access on that, of course, and then you would get a new claim token, the device would get a claim token, and the claim token would be presented to the application, just like that. What I'd like you to see in this picture is that for any authentication, the on-prem stuff is not used. So if you have large investments in on-prem auditing and logging solutions, well, good on you. You will not be able to see these authentications unless you ask them from Microsoft in Azure AD. They're enabled by default these days. They go back about 180 days. There's API connectors for most SIEM solutions, but don't forget to do that. Because if you just do logging and monitoring on Active Directory, you won't see anything happening in the cloud. So what about pass-through authentication? What about the new stuff that Microsoft has said, you know what, this is now general available at Ignite, is where they made that announcement. So in pass-through authentication, you need Azure AD Connect. Because in this scenario, if I authenticate, Azure AD Connect is going to use that pipe that Azure AD Connect sets up to Azure AD. It's always an outbound connection, and it would just grab through the pipe and ask Azure AD Connect, you know what, you have to do some authentication for me, for the user that comes knocking. So of course the user comes knocking with a redirect. Azure AD is going to ask him for the credentials. The credentials are then passed through Azure AD Connect to the Active Directory domain services. There's an OK coming back. You have conditional access in this scenario, but of course you won't have any ADFS claims rules and stuff like that because you won't have any ADFS. But conditional access is going to outgrow those rules anyway. So you get a claim token, and the claim token is then presented to the application. That was exactly the right moment that you thought, but there's one more animation in this slide. So what you see is that now every authentication still goes back to on-prem. But if you only have one Azure AD Connect installation, well, that's not really high available, is it? So there's additional connectors that you can install next to your Azure AD Connect installation to have pass-through authentication be high available. That was the one animation. Now it's complete.
Now that secondary AD Connect server is basically, you're going to be setting up in a cache mode. Well, not really cache mode, but stage.
No, so it's basically, the first one needs to be Azure AD Connect for the agent.
Yep.
And the second one is a separate installation. So you just download the agent, configure it, done. So
That
it can run on any member server.
And it used to be the Azure AD App Proxy agent.
Okay, because I know that when you do the installation, there's a stage mode and then there's a standard. So it's still standard. It's just configured.
No, so it's a different package.
Yeah,
It's a completely different package.
a different. That's part of the installation, but yeah.
Why do we need such kind of a use case? I'm not able to understand which organization would make use of this particular use case because the Active Directory can send the password to Azure Active Directory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's two organizations that would there's organizations that would answer two questions in a very particular way. So the first one is, we think it's silly that we need to have 5 servers on-prem to go to the cloud. So please fix that, Microsoft. And the other one is, oh, we have a regulatory compliance requirement that our password hashes cannot be in the cloud for end users.
Or the auditing issue.
Yeah, or the auditing issue. Yep.
So I have a lot of customers that say we want the authentication to happen on premises always, because that's where the password is. And then the only scenario you had until Ignite was ADFS. But with ADFS, you have to publish your own ADFS servers. You need to protect them. You need to open up a port from outbound to inbound. You're vulnerable to DDoS attacks. You need to put web application proxy servers in front, etc. And it needs to be highly available. And they said, that's too much for us to set up. So that's why they thought of this one and then made it better.
There's also another small scenario in which if you have a remote user and your on-premises password is expired, we pass password hash sync. If the password is expired for the remote user can still log into any Azure AD Cloud services until we actually resetting or forcing him to reset his password.
And how is that different from on-prem?
Well, at least on-prem he gets a notification to reset the password. If he's not connecting on-prem, he's not even getting a notification to reset the password. I mean, potentially can still log in for another 14, 50 days and using the exact same password he had.
Yep, and on-prem it's only 7. Yeah, because of the TGT lifetime. Yep.
Yeah, but that, now, the notification he's talking about, are you talking about when the password itself has expired, or the notification that it's about to expire?
No, the actual password is expired.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. It's funny because you can actually see progress within Azure AD Connect to actually solve that challenge. But we'll dive into that later on. Because first I want to talk to you about seamless single sign-on. Seamless single sign-on it has a lot of potential, but it also has a lot of issues today, unfortunately. So in seamless single sign-on, what happens is you have Azure AD Connect, you enable the seamless single sign-on option, which is literally an option in the UI. I will show you in a couple of minutes. And then if a colleague goes to the Azure Active Directory integrated application, when he is on-prem or connected through a VPN, but he has to have a direct line of sight to an Active Directory domain controller, then there's going to be a redirect, of course. The colleague is going to come knocking to Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory is going to do the most fabulous thing ever. It's going to say, I'm not Azure Active Directory. I'm ADFS on-prem. Can we please do Kerberos? So yes, it has to be in the safe site list. There's a couple of requirements that you have to do. It currently only works with Internet Explorer, which is also kind of a thing. So what you'll see is that that response is sent. The colleague is going to do Kerberos. There's a different account. So we were talking about the KubeTGT account yesterday. This is not, these Kerberos tickets are not signed by the KubeTGT account. There's a different account. There was a different account.
So if you want to see the technical details, there's a session at 4 p.m., which is
all right.
my session. And we'll go into like the nitty-gritty details of this.
Yep. But it's not the KubeTGT secret that's used.
Well, now you pique my interest from an AD perspective. Is it a current standard AD account, or is it a separate something that is signed?
It's
by the
a standard computer object.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I see how that could work.
And that Kerberos ticket is then sent to Azure Active Directory that is able to decrypt that. And then you will get a claim type or a claim token back, and you can present that claim token to the Azure Active Directory integrated application. There's a couple of gotchas, but you're going to do PDA at 4, right?
Yep.
Yep, perfect. Because then we can keep the flow going, because this is the twister mat, if you will, that we show customers to give them a clear-cut difference overview between the different authentication scenarios. So, of course, there's some really open doors, and I like kicking in open doors, so that's fun. Of course, claim rules are only available with ADFS, obviously. So if you have investments in ADFS claim rules, and I recently had a customer that wanted to have people that were vacationing or traveling to China not to be able to authenticate anymore. So there's a guy, 1 day per week, he's getting the IP ranges of China, regexing them in Azure in ADFS claim rules, and then updating the claim rules so they can go at it for a week again. So, but conditional access is actually going to have country tags soon. And when I told that guy, well, of course you can. It's about that kind of reaction, yeah, a big smile, because he's getting a day per week back. Absolutely. So conditional access is available in all scenarios. And as I said, and the country tags are just the first example, conditional access is actually going to outgrow the ADFS claims rules. Then, of course, highly available is ADFS. It's easy. Password authentication is easy. Password hashing. It's not that. It's not that easy. Yes, there's staging mode, but staging mode uses. I'm recorded, right? Crap. It uses the bullshit equivalent of high availability. It's a cold standby. Yep. So that's not really high available. But then again, you only need to box about every 30 minutes, right? So it's okay if it's gone for a while. You won't have any synchronization, but it will still work. And then, of course, in terms of cost, Active Directory Federation Services is going to cost you, as a scenario, at least one Azure AD Connect box, at least 2 ADFS servers, and at least 2 web app proxies. And don't be fooled by the documentation, but if you want to have a relying party trust with Microsoft Azure AD, you have to have publicly available ADFS servers. The best way to do that, the supported way to do that, is use web app proxies. Cost for password hashing is just one server. And you can actually have Azure AD Connect run on a domain controller if you really, really, really want to. But of course we don't. And password authentication, well, that depends on your infrastructure. So you have sync groups in Azure AD Connect for password authentication. You can have sync groups per location. So if you have multiple locations, you can have one Azure AD Connect and agents on all those locations. You can have high available agents, so you can have 2 on each locations. Yeah, depending on the amount of locations and stuff like that, that could really end up with a lot of servers. But it will be highly available without bullshit.
But it won't do. So we recommend to about 2, maximum 4 password authentication agents, because it doesn't do load balancing. It is highly available, but it doesn't have any preference. So wherever you authenticate, if I'm in China, it could very well be that the password authentication in America is actually authenticating me, right? It's just what the connection between Azure and the agent is, and which agent is the first to the queue to pick up the authentication request, and that's it.
But then again, you can actually see that pass-through authentication is the equivalent of the Okta model. Okta has agents as well. Okta has a grouping of Okta agents as well. They have an on-prem agent that takes care of everything that you need, except that the Okta model is based on a user per month fee. So if you're on that model with Okta, then I think it's best to work out a business case and see, okay, do I really need Okta and their monthly fees, or if I just stand up one server or 2 servers with PDA and an agent, am I going to have the same functionality? So yeah, Microsoft is really, really, really going after Okta's market aggressively with this feature. And you can bet on that. Everybody got the picture, right?
From all of the scenarios that you described, do you see any scenario where would you recommend the customers going today to start the implementation, moving to hybrid scenario? Anything which is not the adoption?
So what we currently do is we do SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, with all, actually 7 scenarios that you have, and then we mix and match what the customer needs or can't have, and that flows into an advice.
So it's not just the claim rules, right? So if I have a custom MFA provider, I need to have an Azure ADFS, because there's no way that I can integrate multi-factor authentication that's not Azure MFA or not Azure MFA connected into password authentication.
But they just, I think in Ignite they just announced the integration they had with Duo and another company.
Yeah, so those are like natively integrated with the Azure Active Directory.
Okay.
So the MFA, so you actually log in, you come back to the Azure Active Directory page, and that's where the MFA actually happens, right? But say for example, I have RSA tokens, or I have my custom MFA provider, then I need to have an ADFS server. Right?
Yep.
That's one, and the other one is A lot of customers still have ADFS and they connect all their other applications into it as well, like AWS and Google and whatever they have. And then it's like, does password authentication actually make sense? Because users are already known to like where I'm logging in. Some companies that I work with actually have an unsupported configuration where they have a proxy in front of it that does pre-authentication and caching of the credentials, so they get full single sign-on.
Yeah, one of the questions we ask is if you have ADFS integrated on-prem applications, for instance, because it does not make sense to have an on-prem application connected to Azure AD, because if your internet connection fails, you need to go outside, and you couldn't. Yeah, so you
Additional
have
access.
redundant. It might be.
Centralized auditing.
It might be, but there's all those nuances that. Well, you can.
Yeah.
Wow, our masks really fell off now. Yeah, we're both consultants apparently. It depends. It depends. All right.
Just
No
one more
worries.
thing to add, at least in my opinion. I think there are also for companies that are already invested in ADFS, there are still some benefits in at least having the password hash sync enabled.
Absolutely.
So things like redundancy, Azure ADDS, or the link
Identity protection.
Right.
Yep.
So here's a good scenario, right? I'm not going to name the name, but there was a customer, a global customer, that got attacked by the Pataya virus. So they came in on Monday morning, and like 90% of the entire infrastructure that they had worldwide was unusable. And of course they used ADFS or another federation, I don't know if it's ADFS or another one, to log into their Azure AD, Office 365 and everything else. If you were to synchronize all those hashes, it would be very simple to say, to log into Azure AD, switch over to managed domains, and everybody could log in again with their old password. Right? And then at least you have communications channels back up. So it's always handy to replicate them, but if you're in a pure PKA or ADFS scenario, the hashes that are synced aren't really used until you use domain services.
Maybe it happened with mud.
Sorry?
It happened with mud. Mud function.
There were others. It's really just one that lost.
One of the other issues that you see, for instance, with PDA is the only way that you can switch a tenant on and off PDA is with Azure AD Connect. So if your Azure AD Connect box fails or anything happens to it, how do you switch off it? How do you do that? So there's all kinds of gotchas and stuff like that.
I know how you switch it.
I know too. All right. So just a couple of rules of thumb before we go into the more nitty-gritty stuff. You can only have one Azure AD tenant connected to Azure AD Connect. It's a hard limitation of Azure AD Connect. You can actively synchronize between on-premise identity, Active Directory, or LDAP. So after installation, you configure it with /enable LDAP instead of just configure it. And Azure Active Directory operates either in Active Directory mode or LDAP mode. They are actively working on that. If you go through the wizard, you can actually see that there's a drop-down menu. There's only Active Directory in it. But you can expect something to happen there.
What's the distinction between the two modes?
Well, the distinction between the two modes is undocumented at this time. Yeah, so the /enable LDAP, that's something that someone blogged about a week ago.
Yeah.
But there's no official word from Microsoft yet.
So the difference is in the, or as far as I know, the difference is in the rule set. So if you choose Active Directory mode, the rule set that we'll talk about in the next session, it has things like SAM account name and specific Active Directory attributes that in LDAP aren't there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. So how do we use Azure AD Connect? As Roelf already told us, there's express settings. And Microsoft Marketing has marketed this feature as you can have hybrid identity in as little as 4 clicks. Well, it's 4. You have to click on the OK button 4 times and then once on finish. But yeah, that's it. So you can have an express settings hybrid identity running in about 5 minutes because it has to do an initial sync, stuff like that. Then what you end up with is an Azure AD Connect installation that is installed in C program files that uses a SQL Server Express these days. It uses password hash sync. The health agent is installed. Well, there was an issue with the latest version of Azure AD Connect with the health agent, but it is default install again in version 1.1.649. There was an issue with that in 647. It has auto upgrades enabled, so you don't have to worry about continuous integration and stuff like that, and what Microsoft is doing with deprecation of previous version, because you would just get a new version every time Microsoft deems you worthy of a new version. It's not highly available, but again, you only need it every 30 days. And there's 151 attributes synchronized across a couple of object types. So if you look at the rules, you're going to see about 200 something attributes actually in there, but it's 151 unique attributes that are synced with the default sync rules. Luckily, we have 75 minutes about that. Cool.
Question?
Yeah.
You said SQL Express, so is there a limitation on the number of users or objects?
Yes.
Yes.
There is officially no limit on the amount of users, but there's a limit on the size of the database, which is 10 gigs. And the Microsoft recommendation is 100K users max.
After that, you need to go to SQL.
Yeah, after that you have to go to SQL. And then what you have to do is you have to use customized settings. So if you are an organization, for instance, with 100K users, if you don't want your Azure AD Connect to be domain joined, that's the solution. You can do that with customized settings. If you want to use an MSA or GMSA, if you want to do staging mode, I recommend a GMSA. If you want to support multi-forest topologies, that's all in customized settings. This is fun. You can take a picture of this one, or you can take a picture of this one. Because this is the nitty-gritty table that we made. So there's a couple of things that you see in Express settings, and with custom settings, you can pick different settings if you want to. I made an extra column that says, okay, you can change this afterwards. There's some check marks in there. But I also used a block to tell you that if you change it afterwards, you might not get what you wanted. So if you have password hashing enabled in an Express settings, then you go back to ADFS, what do you think happens to those synced hashes of hashes? Who thinks they're going to be deleted by Microsoft? No one. Perfect, because they're not. They're still going to be there. They're not going away. You sync them up. How are you going to sync them out? Give everybody a blank hash? You can't do that. So there's some differences there. Of course, group-based filtering. There's a group-based filtering option in Azure AD Connect. With a group membership, you can enable that, disable that. But there's a deletion threshold in Azure AD Connect. It's 500, 200. It floats around a bit. But the best practice is to keep that at about 10% of your total amount of users, because else you would just hit in day and day and day again. So if you have your total population synced, and then you go to group-based filtering, and you would only have, I don't know, 10 or 15 people, then you will not get that change synced, because you would hit the deletion threshold. You would have to disable the deletion threshold, or up it as much as, well, actually your entire population, so that's the same. Then sync it, and then enable it again. Or else it won't sync through. And of course, the scenario-based attribute filtering, the extension synchronization, the min sync, the minimum sync, which is free attributes. If you really look at it, it's account enabled, it's user principal name, and it's
User principal name,
object GUID,
immutability,
source anchor,
yeah.
source anchor, account enabled, source anchor, and user principal name. Those are the three attributes that you really need to sync for users and iNetwork persons. Remember those? So that's the free attributes. But actually, there's a white paper coming up, I believe, that specifies 6 attributes. So there's display name as well, and some other stuff that you really want.
The other one that we didn't put in here was organizational unit selection.
Yep.
That's also in custom settings.
And of course, if you want to enable the write back features, you have to go to customize settings.
That's only available as setup, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah, so the OU selection, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so officially it's only at installation, but there's a way to change it afterwards.
Okay.
Second
I
session.
would like to see that.
Second session.
Thank you.
Yep, and there was actually a bug with that a couple of versions ago. All right. So what you can't do, going from Express to Customize, is you can't change from Active Directory to LDAP or vice versa. You can't do that. You have to uninstall it, install it again, configure it again. You can't change the service accounts or sync groups. If you went with the default sync groups that are local groups, you want to change that to Active Directory groups, you can't do that. Uninstall, reinstall. You can't change the installation locations. Duh, all right? And if you're going from custom settings to Express settings, so if you have custom settings, there's a couple, I think there's 2 or 3 scenarios still where Microsoft doesn't support auto upgrades for Azure AD Connect. They're really working hard to get everybody on auto upgrades. But if you go from custom settings to Express settings, so you reinstall and go to Express settings, don't expect to have auto upgrades.
Thinking also if you're using SQL Server, not SQL Express, maybe not allowing that.
No, I think SQL is one of the scenarios that now already works.
Okay.
Yeah.
It works. Well, okay. On that note, is for auto upgrades, do you have to configure it if you're using custom, or is it one of those automated settings that you can just click through?
Now Microsoft decides if you're auto upgradable, if you're worthy enough for auto upgrades, and then it will actually do that.
If your scenario is simple enough so that you can auto upgrade without any risk.
Yeah. Then you're
Do
worthy.
you know how they determine that?
They do regression testing with Azure AD Connect all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how they.
That makes me feel much better.
I'm so glad I don't work for Microsoft. Okay, so what Azure AD Connect isn't, because we've only been talking to what is Azure AD Connect, so now let's talk what Azure AD Connect isn't. So it's not a highly available solution all the time. Staging mode, that's not high availability, because it offers cold standby. And you have to detect it yourself, the failure, and then switch over. Azure AD Connect Health helps, really does. Staging mode is not a true solution. There's a user voice, I thought, about 2 weeks ago that asked for a true highly available solution for that. I could share it with the hashtag of the conference. Let's see. Azure AD Sync includes only one sync engine. We had some scenarios, some customer engagements where the sync engine was partially broken. So it remained partially broken until we fixed it. And there's no, well, the detection logic for that scenario is improving in Azure AD Connect, but it's still not 100%. But BIM and FIM have the same restriction. And Azure AD Connect relies heavily on SSL and TLS. It's a .NET 4 application. There's a registry key that you can use so that you can force it to use TLS 1.2. The Azure AD Connect infrastructure on the side of Microsoft, currently, might be, but I don't think they support TLS 1.3 yet. They're doing some stuff with the endpoints nowadays. They communicated on that last week, that if you don't use Azure AD Connect and you do use ADFS, you have to change the endpoints for ADFS manually. That was a blog post last week. But then again, if SSL or TLS is really, really, really broken, or it's downplayed, or whatever, that's a risk. It's not really a big risk for us, but it's more of a risk for Microsoft, because if you use Fiddler, for instance, and you look at the traffic that Azure AD Connect does, you can actually see some of the API keys that Microsoft uses because they're shared among all Azure AD Connect installations. You actually tell who you are by specifying your Azure AD tenant ID. This is what you came for, right? Recommendations. So we still, and I think everyone still recommends ID fix. Before you sync, just to avoid sync errors, use ID sync, download it. There's an automatic remediation method inside ID fix. Don't use that, because that might just screw you over even more. But there's also a really good export solution. So you can export the data into Excel, make your pivot tables, and create an attack plan to solve it. Choose the right authentication scenario. As I said, if you start off with PHS, then go to ADFS, you would still have the hashes in Azure AD still. So if you don't want them to be there, if you have a regulatory requirement not to have them there, then you have to choose the right authentication scenario from the get-go. And of course, if you ever saw, let's see if I can do that. If you ever saw the choice between a work or school account and a Microsoft account, you are officially in the danger zone, because Microsoft has some very strict plans actually to merge the two databases. So if you don't want your two accounts to be merged in a way that you're not feeling comfortable with, change the email address on your personal account, on your Microsoft account.
When are they doing this merge?
I have no idea. They practiced on the Xbox merger. That's what the official word is. But they are planning and doing this. It's funny because if you look at Azure AD B2B and you do Azure AD B2B with a Microsoft account, there's an org ID created for the Microsoft account. There's also merger going on already there. But it's transient to the user at this point. Cool.
So is the idea that they're basically merging the MSAs into Azure AD tenants?
Yeah. Yeah, into the same Cosmos DB. Yep. Cool. Well, implement on Windows Server 2012 or 2 are up, because there's less reboots needed for implementation. If you want to install Azure AD Connect on Windows Server 2008, you have to reboot it 4 times. It's really funny to do. And if you want to have password authentication and single sign-on, you have to be on 2012 or 2 or up. It doesn't work otherwise. But of course, Microsoft has a really wide bandwidth that you can use versions of. So Office 2007 is now unsupported with Office 365. Office 2010, you need to have a specific patch. 2013, 2017 are supported with Office 365. That's a skill that moves forward all the time. So if you now install Windows Server 2008 with Azure AD Connect, the support on Windows Server 2008 is going to stop pretty soon. So then you would have to migrate your Azure AD Connect again, and you'll only be piling on trouble for your admins. Place Azure AD Connect next to your domain controllers and use staging mode. Not for high available, but for lifecycle management. Because if there's a new version of Azure AD Connect, because this is funny. If you have a new version of Azure AD Connect, only that version is available for download. So if you have an auto upgrade and you want to go back to the previous version, how are you going to do that? That download is no longer available. But if you have staging mode with auto upgrades disabled, you could upgrade the staging mode, use CS Analyzer to see if the metaverse changes and stuff like that actually work in the Connect space. So you can actually see that the rules don't change and they match up with an end result. Then you could actually switch over to the staging mode and make the active one the staging mode again. And then with the next upgrade, switch them again. So that's lifecycle management, and you can actually go back then.
As far as your point about the AD Connect server next to your domain controller, are you talking like in the same data center, same rack, what?
With as little latency as possible.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Right. Don't proxy Azure AD Connect. So yes, Azure AD Connect uses TCP 443 to communicate with Azure AD. It looks like HTTPS, it smells like HTTPS, but it sure isn't. Because if you want to do pass-through authentication, you want Azure AD to grab the Azure AD Connect installation to do stuff for pass-through authentication. That is not going to work through a proxy. TCP5671 is the one port for Azure AD Connect Health. So if you use outbound rules in your data center, be sure to add it. There were a couple of bugs because they switched the port from 5721 to 5671, because 5721 is the port for System Center Configuration Manager, and Kaseya. They use the same port for client management and server management. So they changed it up. We still do TCP 5671 and 5721, but we're about to move to our customers and say, okay, you can now delete the 5721 because we're actually not seeing that traffic anymore. And I said health is on by default, but it requires premium to notify and use. And pass-through authentication used to use TCP 9090. There was even a bug with it that the auto upgrade would fail if it couldn't connect with TCP 9090. That was fun. But that's now, since 484, it's all 443. Another one. Azure AD Connect and ADFS, better together. There's no official statement from Microsoft anymore, but this is really where Microsoft is moving with Azure AD Connect. And as we refer back to one of the first slides, they want one tool, one solution to manage everything. You can have Azure AD Connect if you allow WMI traffic between Azure AD Connect and your ADFS servers and your web app proxies to manage ADFS for you. The benefits are really clear because you can have automatic device registration of domain join devices. Microsoft now calls that enterprise join. That was domain join plus plus. So that's enterprise join, and that works out of the box. And the MSDS consistency GUID as a source anchor. That's the stuff that they do if you set up Azure AD Connect to do the trust, the Office 365 identity platform trust. If you have the convert MSOL domain to federated, you cannot benefit from the MSDS consistency GUID. If you have Azure AD Connect set up to relying party trust, you can.
Here's a scenario. Company that I used to work for, we had set up the MSDS consistency GUID as a source anchor for the immutable ID for the user account. How, no, not there anymore, so I don't care, but how would that affect them in a circumstance in which, let's say they want to start using device,
Devices still use object GUID.
Okay.
Yeah, it's only for users. And management tasks made easy. We had a lot of customers that used a free StartCom certificate. It was perfectly valid. There was no monitoring solution telling you, you know what, you have a problem with your certificate. But if you went to the ADFS installation, you would actually see that StartCom certificates were no longer trusted in Chrome first, and then Firefox and Internet Explorer and Edge followed swiftly. So we had to change those ADFS service communication certificates on loads and loads and loads of ADFS servers for different customers. We use Azure AD Connect for that, because Azure AD Connect, you can just specify, this is the certificate. It will copy the certificate over to all the servers, and then switch over the service communications certificate in ADFS. That works like a charm. I was so happy with that. You can have verifying ADFS login, stuff like that. And please, please, please use health. You are using it. If you really wanted to help you apply one premium license, I know it's still money. It's still about $50-60 per year. But your admins will benefit from that.
Can you still have the Azure AD Connect manage existing ADFS if it wasn't first installed?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Now, for leveraging the health in terms of premium license,
yeah,
would that be for the entire tenancy, or can you just pare it down?
So the actual wording on that is you need a license for everyone that benefits. So who benefits from Azure AD Connect Health?
Everyone being
your admins.
Your admins. Okay, so only for those accounts.
Yep.
I don't know what the official wording is, but I would be very, very cautious with that one. So just ask Microsoft.
I will ask, because
yep.
if you get away with a single service account, whoopee, if it's for everything, it's about
800,000 objects.
Yep.
You get other stuff as well, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's loads of stuff, yeah. So it's funny because Azure MFA is part of Premium as well. If you're an admin, you don't have to buy the MFA license. And I can't wrap my head around it. But there's an official number now on the amount of people with admin roles in Azure AD that are configured with MFA. And it's a percentage of the admins, and it's 0.73%. 0.73. So less than 1% of user accounts with privileges in Azure AD are configured with MFA. And it's free, people. Oh well, anyway. So what have we been talking about last hour? Use Azure AD Connect. Don't use FIM or MIM. If you're using a third-party solution, be careful what it offers you and what it doesn't offer you. I think we highlighted that. Choose carefully what authentication scenario to use, because you might end up with attributes in Azure AD that you don't want there. Choose between express settings and custom settings. Requires some planning, perhaps some designing, good stuff. And avoid lockouts, so rename your personal account email address. And with that, I think I can say thank you, but I don't, because we have, in 30 minutes, the next one, which is Azure AD Connect World is Not Enough. Yes, of course. You can ask questions, you can have coffee, you can do whatever you want. We'll be here for, well, at least another 105 minutes.
I'm not sure if I understand it correctly when you say about stream authentication. Because on your slide there was an additional connector.
Yeah.
So is this kind of high availability, or how can I?
Yeah, so by default, the password authentication agent is installed in Azure AD Connect as soon as you configure it. But then you would only have one server with an agent on it. So if you want high availability, because you're depending on local authentication, you can download additional agents. It's just an installer. And you install that on different servers in your environment. And then they automatically create an highly available service for you.
So when that authentication request comes in from Azure to the agent then, I'm assuming, forwards to DC for verification over...
No, so what actually happens is that when a user types his username and password in the Azure portal or in the Azure Active Directory login screen, the credentials are placed on a queue, on a service bus, and each agent individually looks at that service bus.
Okay.
So as soon as a request pops up on the service bus, the fastest agent will collect it.
Right, so it's constantly monitoring that service.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, then that follows the model of a lot of these agents now that are constantly reaching out, checking, et cetera, whatever, like SCCM, ONG, all of them use a similar module.
Yep.
Gotcha. And then it just, whoever responds first pulls that down,
Yep.
verify. But ultimately, when it pulls it down from that queue on-prem, it still has to check against.
Yeah, so it pulls it down, unpacks the credentials,
Gotcha.
does an authentication.
For a second, guys, thank you very much.
Yep, there's coffee.
We will have 20 minutes coffee.
Yep.
25 minutes.